Okay, so this is Gemara Nedarim, Daf Yomi Zayin, as we conclude another incredible week of Daf Yomi. Today's share has been sponsored by a close friend of the Daf, as a Schos Ilin Neshama, for Ramosha ben Chaim Halevi Bernstein, whose yard site was on the 14th, Yud Daled Cheshvan, and B'siyata Dishmaya, the learning of the entire Chabura day by day, Daf by Daf. Each word of Torah of immeasurable value should bring Rav Moshe ben Chaim Halevi to an higher place in Gan Eden Shel Mailam. And we're holding on the bottom of Tes Zayin Amid Beis, and we're in the middle of discussing V'she'ein nishba'in lavar al ha-mitzvahs. We concluded yesterday with the discussion how one potentially could be making a shvuah against doing a mitzvah and the ramifications therein, especially due to the fact that ein mitzvah is hanis litnu. So now the Gemara begins, and the Gemara says, yesterday, I should say more precisely, we concluded with the makar of lo yachal devarai as the source of ein nishba'in lavar al mitzvahs. Asks the Gemara, ve'ein nishba'in lavar al mitzvahs mehacha nafkalei. Are you telling me that the source that you're not allowed to make a shvuah, to be over a mitzvah? What do we say about 10 lines up from the bottom? We said it's from lo yachal devarai. But asks the Gemara, mehacha nafkalei. It's not true. I have a different source. Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, I would think I would think if someone makes a shvuah to transgress a mitzvah and he does not do it, what would I think? Yechayiv, you made a shvuah and you did not fulfill your shvuah. Therefore, you transgressed your shvuah, you desecrated your word. And therefore, what would the obvious thought process be whenever one desecrates his word? I would have thought, what is the halacha? Yehei chayiv, you should be chayiv. Talmud loymar, as we move over to Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Talmud loymar says the pasuk, Loi lahara oi lehetiv. This is the pasuk that is discussing the ikar, the main source for all shvuos. Says that pasuk lahara lehetiv. For a moment, let's get the pasuk up in front of everyone. Says the pasuk. Nope, that's not it. One more time. Excuse me. Says the pasuk. Oy nefesh ki si shava levateis v'sayim. If someone makes a shvuah levateis v'sayim that comes out of his mouth, lahara oy lehetiv, to do bad or to do good. L'chol asher yivate adam b'shvuah. Whatever one says in a shvuah v'nela mimenu, and it's literally hidden from him, v'hu yada, and he knows about it. What's the halacha? V'ashem la'achas meila. So this is the source for having the necessity, the chiyuv, to bring a carbon shvuah, is what? If one says a shvuah to lehara oy lehetiv, to do bad or to do good, and then he does not follow through on his shvuah. So now let's go back to the Gemara. The key detail that we have to know is that we're saying that it's a shvuah lahara oy lehetiv. Now says the Gemara, ma'atav, just like when it comes to something positive, ma'atav rishos, it's a discretionary item. It's a rishos. One has the personal decision whether to do it or to not. Anytime something positive, you can either do something good or you cannot do something good. What does that mean? That means it's not discussing a mitzvah like we spoke about yesterday. A mitzvah is not a rishos. A mitzvah is an obligation for one to do. So says the Gemara, ma'atava, just like when it says to do something good, what's it referring to? It's referring to a rishos. I decide I want to do something good for you, but it's not a chiyuv, it's not an obligation to put on tefillin to say Shema. Afara rishos. So too, the other part of the pasuk has to mean the same thing. Hara, when it comes to doing bad, has to as well be something that is a rishos, and not something which is what? a violation of a mitzvah. So from here we learn out, Yotza, this excludes Nishba Levatel Esa mitzvahs. If someone makes a shvuah to negate, to nullify, to transgress a mitzvah, V'loi bitel shein arishos biyadai, that you do not have the choice to be mevatel a mitzvah, and just like you do not have the choice to be mevatel a mitzvah, you're not included in the pasuk of lahara lehetiv, and therefore you're not chayiv a carbon shvuah. So ask the Gemara that the main pasuk about all shvuos teaches us that if someone makes a neder levatel a mitzvah, he would not be chayiv a shvuah. So we started off today learning that if you make a shvuah levatel a mitzvah, we learned it out yesterday from lo yachel divarai. Says the Gemara, why? We have a different source. Lahara oy lehitiv. Answers the Gemara, chad kra lemifter mikarbon shvuah, v'chad lemifter min lav de shvuah. Says the Gemara, you're right that it's two different. You're right that it's two mikairos, two psukim. Each one teaches us a slightly different din. One teaches you that it's not called a shvuah and there's no carbon shvuah. One teaches you that's not called a shvuah and there's not even a lav that you transgressed of a shvuah. And now we begin a new Mishnah. And in the theme that we've been discussing, equating, contrasting Nedarim with shvuos, says our Mishnah, Yesh neder b'toich neder ve'in shvuah b'toich shvuah. You could have a neder within a neder, and of course in a moment we'll see exactly what that means. But you cannot have a shvuah within a shvuah. Keitzad, what's the case? Amar harini nazir im oichal. Harini nazir im oichal. If someone says, I will be a nazir if I eat. Now this has nothing to do, let me just clarify a mistake that I personally made. It's nothing to do with eating grapes. That's how one transgresses Nazirus. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about someone says, if I eat bread, if I drink water, then I'm a Nazir. A classical story that he pins his Nazirus on an item. So if someone says, Harini Nazir machal, ve'achal, and he eats, chayev al kol achas ve'achas. The halacha is, each eating obligates a new Nazirus. I said, if I eat, I'm a Nazir. If I eat, I'm a Nazir. So if I eat 2 times, I'm 2 times Nazir. However, if someone says, Shvuah shlo that I should be in a shvuah, I make a shvuah, I will not eat 2 times, va'achal, and then he eats, eina chayev alachas. So when it comes to Nazirus, we're learning. When it comes to Nedarim, we're learning. Now, why Nazirus is Nedarim? A little bit of a shayla. When it comes to Nazirus, not my question, my chavrusas. When it comes to Nazirus, we're learning if you say it 2 times, and then you eat 2 times, what's the halacha? Each and every time is a new Nazirus. However, says the Gemara, excuse me, I said that incorrectly. Say it one more time. If he says, Arini Nazir Machal, and then he's Achal, he eats 1 time, but he made 2 Naziruses pinned on this one act of eating, he's a Nazir 2 times. What does it mean he's a Nazir 2 times, as we will see? That means he's a Nazir for 30 days, and then he's a Nazir for another 30 days. Each Nazirus, Tam Nazir Shleishim Yaim, is a 30-day time period, and therefore he said it 2 times, is 2 times Nazirus. However, if he said that I'm making a shvuah if I eat, or I make a shvuah not to eat, I should say, and then he eats, he is not over his shvuah 2 times. So by neder, it does exist twice. By a shvuah, it does not. And now we go headstrong straight into the Gemara that teaches us, Amar Rav Huna Loishanu. Says Rav Huna, this din does not exist. Loishanu ela da'amar. If he says, Harini Nazir, Harini Nazir Lamachar, says Rav Huna, what is the possibility of creating Nazirus b'seich Nazirus? Is if he says, I'm a Nazir today, and I'm a Nazir tomorrow. Why? Since you're adding on an additional day. I want 1 Nazir to be Chal today. I want another Nazir to be Chal tomorrow. That means for the first 30 days is Nazirus number 1. On day 31 is an extra day of my second Nazirus. Once I have 1 day of a Nazirus, boom, kicks in another 30 days. So any Nazir Ayoim or Nazir Lamacher, since there's an additional day being added on, Chayla Nazirus al Nazirus. Therefore, the second Nazirus is yes chal, could yes exist with the first Nazirus. But if someone says, I'm a Nazir twice today, says Rav Huna, ein chala Nazirus al Nazirus. So Rav Huna comes along and he modifies the din in the Mishnah. That when do we say in the Mishnah that a Nazir is chala and a Nazir? There's neder b'toich neder. Says Rav Huna, that's only if the second Nazirus, the second neder, is adding something on. But if the second Nazirus is not adding something on, then we do not say that there is a neder b'toich neder. That is Rav Huna. Comes along the Gemara, 7 lines from the bottom. Ushmuel Amar, says Shmuel, Afilu Amar ni Nazir Ayoim, ni Nazir Ayoim. Says Shmuel, no, even if you say I'm a Nazir twice today, Chal Nazirus Aleha, it could even be Chal, the second Nazirus, on the same day. So Shmuel, perhaps we could say, is learning the Mishnah more literal, that there's a neder b'teich neder in all scenarios. And Rav Huna says no. Rav Huna says only if the second Nazirus adds on to the first Nazirus. Asks the Gemara 5 lines from the bottom, well, Rav Huna, according to Rav Huna, it comes out, there's 2 types of neder b'teich neder. There's one type of neder b'teich neder that works when you said I'm a Nazir today, I'm a Nazir tomorrow. And there's one type of neder b'teich neder that does not work. When you said I'm a Nazir today, I'm a Nazir today. So in the classical Gemara sense, the Gemara asked Rav Huna, Adetani ein shvua b'teich shvua. Why did the Mishnah ask, why did the Mishnah at the end of the Mishnah say a case of shvua contrasting Nedarim with shvua? Listening, the Mishnah should have said what? Yesh neder b'teich neder, ve'ein neder b'teich neder. It should have said the positive and the negative, the yes and the no, within Nedarim itself. What would the cases be? If you say Rein Nazir, Rein Nazir L'machar, then Yesh neder b'teich neder. If you say Rein Nazir, Rein Nazir Ayoim, then Ein neder b'teich neder. So I asked the Gemara, according to Rav Huna, why does the Mishnah come along and give a case of neder and then give a case of shvua? Why didn't the Mishnah stick to a case of neder? And within the case of neder, teach me the positive and the negative. Teach me that if you say neder hayoim, it does not work. If you say neder hayoim, neder l'machar, it does work. And the Gemara concludes on Amud Beis, kasha. Now, I just explained the Gemara in the most simplistic of terms, but I just will point out for one moment that the Ran over here at the very end, everyone can just look at their screen, the last words of Amud Aleph says, Hilkach loy shayich. It's not possible, as we turn over to our daf for today, la'akshuye liflik lisabidi day. So the Ran is learning a little bit different. The Ran is learning that the Kash and Rav Huna is not the simple way that we just explained it, that it's a lifting, v'lisliv day, that we should have differentiated within the case itself, but rather it's a bit deeper. But let's leave it for now, and let's continue. So that's Rav Huna, and that is Shmuel. Says the Gemara, another Kash and Rav Huna. Again, Rav Huna is learning that the only time there's a neder b'teich neder is if it's adding on. Neder hayoim, neder l'machar. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, top line of Yud Zayin Amid Beis. Tanan, says the Gemara, says the Gemara, we learned in the Mishnah, Yesh neder b'teich neder. This is our Mishnah. There's a neder within a neder, and ve'ein shvua b'teich shvua. And there's not a case of shvua within a shvua. Says the Gemara, heichi dami. And in classical, again, sense, the Mishnah always should be parallel. The contrasting case of neder and shvua should, of course, be the same case. So ask the Gemara, if you're going to tell me that the case where the neder b'toich neder works, What is that case according to Rav Huna? So then let's follow that case through. The same case by Shvua, which will be what? If just like by Nazirus, it's Hayoim and Lamachar, today and tomorrow, so what should it be by Shvua? It should be a Shvua, I won't eat entity A, and then Shvua, I won't eat entity B. Shvua, I won't eat Te'enim, I won't eat figs, and then Shvua, I will not eat grapes. If that is the case, meaning parallel to today and tomorrow is figs and grapes. If that's the case, ask the Gemara, why is the Shvua not Chal on the Shvua? This, just like in the case of Nazirus, on day 31, there's something left of the first Nazirus over that allows the new Nazirus to kick in. So too, when it comes to the case of the Shvua, it should be the same. Ella, ask the Gemara, meaning, because the second Shvua, if the second Shvua is on a completely different entity, the first Shvua was on figs, the second Shvua is on dates, why would the Shvua not be Chal? So says the Gemara, if you play out the case according to Rav Huna, that you make it parallel between the Reisha and the Seifa, you make it parallel between Nedarim and Shvua, you learn that by Nedarim it's today and tomorrow, by Shvua it's fig and grapes, it should certainly work. Yet the Mishnah says no. The Mishnah says it doesn't work by Shvua. Ela yichidami. So says the Gemara, so what must the case be? So let's work the other way. So what's the case that it doesn't work by Shvua? The case in Shvua that it doesn't work is that you said the same entity twice. And therefore, since the second Shvua has nothing to work upon, because the second Shvua is merely restating the first Shvua, so there's nothing for it to be Chal on, then the Kavasai Gavi the Nazirus, they'll flip it back. So what's the first case of the ratio of Nazirus? Echidami. The case is when he said, I'm going to be a Nazir today, I'm going to be a Nazir today. Vikotani, yesh neder b'toich neder. Kashel Rav Huna. So says the Gemara, and again, the fact that the Gemara speaks this out, the wording is a little bit different than we're used to in Gemara, is just another application of the rule that Lashon Nedarim is a bit mishoneh. We're finding constantly that the wordage of the Gemara is a little bit different over here. But I asked the Gemara, how do we reconcile the Reisha and the Seifa, Nedarim and Shvuos? Nedarim, it does work within the Shvua does not. If Nedarim is Hayoim and Machar, today and tomorrow, then Shvua should be what? Figs and grapes, and then it should work. And the Mishnah says it doesn't. Rather, what must be the case of Shvua that does not work? Must be figs, or grapes. Then by Neder, what should it be? Hayoim. And then that should not work either, according to Rav Huna. So Kasha the Rav Huna, Amar Lachar Rav Huna, answers Rav Huna, Mas Nisan Da'amar, Ini Nazar Yom Ini Nazar Lamach. Rav Huna sticks to his guns. The Reisha of the Mishnah is when he said, I'm going to be a Nazir today, I'm going to be a Nazir tomorrow. What's your kasha? Then what's the same case by Shvua? You thought it's figs and grapes. The Kavasah Gabi Shvua, the Amar, not figs and grapes. Shlach al Teinim, figs. V'chazar v'Amar Shvua shloyoichal Teinim ve'anavim, both. Just like in the case of Nazir, it was Hayom and Machar, who's 30 and then into 31. That's more comparable, says Rav Huna, to a Shvua of figs, and then a Shvua of what? Figs and dates. And what's the halacha in a case of a Shvua? If one makes a second Shvua with the same item, adding on a second item, the halacha is Deloy Chayla. It's not Chal, as the second Shvua has nothing to be Chal upon. because the second shvua is a chatzi shear. He said te'enim and anavim, and the te'enim part of the shvua cannot be chal. Why not? Because he already made a shvua of te'enim. Here's a person already is not allowed to eat te'enim, and then he says, I won't eat te'enim and anavim. You already can't eat te'enim. So if that half doesn't work, the second half of the shvua is not a complete entity, and it won't be chal. That's how Rav Huna learns the Mishnah. Asks the Gemara 1 second. Ve'amar Rabba taught us shvua sh'lo te'enim v'chazar mishur sh'lo te'enim ve'anavim. Says Rabba, in this precise case, in which he made a shvua not to eat figs, and then he made a shvua not to eat figs and dates, v'ochal te'enim, and then what did he do? He ate te'enim, v'hifrish carbon, and he separated carbon for his figs, v'chazar v'ochal anavim, and then he ate grapes. Havelu anavim chatzi shir, vein mevi'in carbon al chatzi shir. So says Rabba that in a case that you separated the carbon and then you transgress the second part of your shvua, then you can't bring a new carbon. So what's the obvious implication? Alma, hey chadamar shul shalchalteinu v'chazar meshul shalchalteinu v'anavim. So we see from Rabba the exact opposite of what we just said. We see from Rabba that if you said shvua I'm not going to eat dates and then shvua I'm not going to eat figs, and the shvua won't be figs and dates, the opposite. Migu dechal shvua l'anavim chalinami al teinim. Meaning, from Rabba, we see that there's only we'll call it almost a technical issue. There's a problem if you went and you separated the carbon. Now, the second half of your shvua is not a complete entity. But let's say you did not separate a carbon, which is the case of our Mishnah. Then seemingly it should be clear that it is yes chal. So you just learned the case of the Mishnah was figs, and then figs and dates. And you just told me that's a case where the shvua is not chal on a shvua. From Rabba, we see the exact opposite. From Rabba, we see that should be a case where it's a yes chal a shvua on a shvua. Because the only reason Rabba said it wouldn't work is in the scenario that you separated the carbon for one half, and the second half is only a chatzi shir. Answers the Gemara. Rav Huna lo sfira leike Rabba. Givaldik. Rav Huna doesn't hold of Rabba. What's your whole kasha? How does Rav Huna explain the Mishnah? I Rabba, says Rav Huna, shkaya kol tov. I don't hold of Rabba. And we'll pick up from here, b'siyata d'shmaya, on the next shir.